what is digital health, how to protect it, how to commercialize it, regulatory and reimbursement strategies, and finally financing and startups. We have a great panel today to hopefully learn a little bit more about this topic. I myself am a biologist by training, so I'm looking forward to learning along with you. Without further ado, I'd like to kick off the introduction of the panels. Kathryn?
Sure thing. Thanks for having me. My name is Kathryn Bowsher. I run a consulting group that specializes in go-to-market and driving adoption of innovative solutions throughout healthcare. Today, those innovations are mainly digitally enabled. I come from a mixed operating executive and consulting background. I was director of global marketing for Baxter's largest product line, VP of marketing for a small medical device company, CEO of a private antimicrobial textile company, which nowadays I find myself describing as an infection prevention company. The purpose of the company was to prevent the spread of pathogens that cause hospital-acquired infections. And my clients are a mix of large organizations across sectors of health. So Amgen, Bayer, Stanford Health, Cleveland Clinic. I do the whole mix, as well as startups who are selling innovative solutions into those environments. I love uncharted territory and getting involved early to shape the product and market fit.
Great, Peter?
Hello, everyone. My name's Peter Fleischut. I'm from New York Presbyterian. I've had the fortunate opportunity to be at New York Presbyterian for about the past 14 years. Originally trained as an anesthesiologist, and I've had various roles throughout the years. I practiced for a number of years as an anesthesiologist at Weill Cornell Medicine. During that time, have had the great opportunity to work within quality, IT, and most recently serve as the Senior Vice President, Chief Transformation Officer, where I oversee a couple different areas, our digital health, our pharmacy operations, our Epic implementation, data analytics, and also some areas in artificial intelligence. And I really want to thank everybody for the opportunity to be able to speak on this panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Roger?
Hi, my name is Roger Kwan. I'm a partner out of Haynes and Boone San Francisco office, where I serve as the chair of the Precision Medicine and Digital Health practice group. What I do is basically I counsel clients on IP and data rights matters as it relates to precision medicine and digital health, innovation and businesses. Been in this space, precision medicine, digital health space for over 10 years as a legal counselor.
Great. Thank you, Roger. Jason?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jason Novak, and thank you very much for having me on this panel. I'm also a partner in the San Francisco office of Haynes and Boone. I'm actually a Roger's practice partner, and my practice is very much the same. The practice is about 6 years old now, or 5 years old now. Roger and I actually were former in-house counsel at Thermo Fisher Scientific, where we saw a lot of these issues emerge inside the corporation and started to practice around it a few years back.
Thank you. Anshu?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Anshu Vaish. I am a director of external innovation at Janssen R&D, J&J. My role is very much focused on looking at the external landscape from a data science perspective. So my specific group is central data sciences. So looking at it from a data sciences perspective and seeing interesting partnerships that we can develop, whether it's VCs, academic institutions, startups, companies, you name it. If there's an interesting solution that you have, I'm excited to talk to you and see how we can work together to improve our business and solve key needs of our therapeutic areas. My own personal background, briefly, MD by schooling, ex-management consultant, former digital health founder as well in the remote patient monitoring space, and started a nonprofit focused on clean water, malnutrition, maternal child health in India and Sierra Leone. So thanks for the opportunity.
Great, thank you. And I would also like to thank our colleagues at J Labs who are partnered with us on this series, helping us identify panelists and topics that are germane and to talk about. My name is Lisa Polkanik. I'm Senior Managing Director for the Center of Technology and Licensing for the Weill Cornell campus of Cornell University. So CTL oversees all intellectual property for the Cornell University and all of its sister colleges. I think it's safe to say the bread and butter of the intellectual property portfolio that we've historically handled is therapeutics, devices, diagnostics, and plants for Cornell University, which is a land-grant institution. But we've seen over the past handful of years that digital health is becoming an increasingly important asset class. And I'm interested to hear all of the panelists' thoughts on what do we mean by digital health? It seems we can't read anything in the newspaper or popular press or even trade journals that doesn't call something digital health. So if we could just kind of kick that off, maybe Roger, you can start with what is digital health? Orientate us within this dialogue and discussion today.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm happy to, Lisa. Rather than really define the digital health as what it is and what it isn't, I like to kind of take a perspective of really looking at it as the application of digital technologies to really transform a lot of the traditional paradigms of healthcare. And what I mean by that is, when I think of traditional paradigms, I think of it, healthcare as being delivered as a one-size-fits-all approach to diagnostics and treatment, right? What I mean by that is, if you look at how diagnostics products and a lot of therapeutics are brought to market, they're studied in the masses. They're not really kind of studied on an individualized basis, patient by patient. Also, another traditional paradigm is that of the provider-centric model to the delivery of medicine, where basic delivery medicine is being done at the provider site as opposed to you as the patient. And last but not least, it's the siloing of healthcare information and data. So that's what I kind of frame as some of the traditional paradigms of healthcare. And the new digital technologies that we're talking about that's transforming it right now before our very eyes is the advent of the application of wireless connectivity and the Internet of Things. The use of big data analytics and storage concepts, as well as AI machine learning. So when you apply those digital technologies into, again, transforming healthcare, what were some of the things that result from it is, for example, this idea of personalized precision approach to diagnosis and treatment, right? Powered by a lot of these data analytics and AI machine learning techniques and technologies. You see a shift from a provider-centric model to what we term as more of a patient-centric model, where the delivery of healthcare is being done actually at the patient level, right? With remote patient monitoring, telehealth, virtual health, et cetera. And also you're gonna see this advent of what we term as the digital hospital, right? Where health information really is shared very seamlessly within and between healthcare providers, right? Which it wasn't so much so before, because a lot of those records information was kept in physical files and systems that really didn't necessarily talk to each other in such an easy way.
Great, thank you. Does anybody else have a view on what we're talking about today? What is digital health to you?
Lisa, I agree with, sorry, go ahead.
That's okay, Peter, you go first, I'll go after you.
I agree with Roger, and to add to it, I think there's two real definitions. One, having a good technical framework for what digital health is. I think Mass General is the one that created this, but really comes down to there's really synchronous and asynchronous video between patients and providers, and the third is really remote patient monitoring. So from a technical perspective, I think we can look at it that way. But from an overall cultural perspective, I think that the term digital health even will start to go away. It's just health. I think that it's a core component to the way that people are going to access care moving forward. And if anything, the pandemic has shown us that. And whatever the percentage is, 20, 30% of all care on an ambulatory basis now is being provided via telehealth and digital health. So I think it really just is health.
I totally agree with it's just health. I live for the day when we don't call it digital health. I think of it as a new set of tools and technologies to further improve healthcare. Just like at one point we added a wide range of biologic drug making tools and technologies in order to expand what we could do therapeutically from the chemistry-based ones. Now we have digital tools to expand what we can do in both data and care. When I think about what the impact is that is going to be, the biggest thing is to move the care closer to the patients, to make it less facility-centric, and to Roger's point, less doctor-centric. The patient is mobile, the patient has another life, the patient wants their healthcare to fade into the background and enable the rest of their life. And so the idea of being able to use tools to make that a more seamless experience is a great way to think about it in my mind. The other thing is all the things Roger talked about information where and when you need it. And then efficiencies, operational efficiencies, because we have a lot of our business data siloed and a lot of the patient data siloed. We've got a lot of inefficiencies, rework, things like that. And so if you can start to clear out that sludge, you can get better value for your dollar in care. And so I look forward to the day when we don't talk about digital health or telehealth or any of those segments, but we have an omnichannel patient experience.
Anshu, do you have a view?
Yeah, I can add on. I mean, I agree with everything that everybody else has said. From a pharma perspective, right? I think about it in sort of three categories of what we do and how digital sort of threads the needle between all of them, right? And it's enhancing everything that we do, right? So there's early stage drug discovery and how we bring cutting edge research to inform the second phase, which is our clinical trials and clinical development, to our third phase, which is kind of post-market, post-launch in the market and our drugs, right? So if we go category by category, when I think about digital at least, and data and technology and how it enhances all three of those buckets. An early stage drug discovery, there's all sorts of interesting applications of AI and ML using computing to speed up target discovery and matching and identification and all of that good stuff. In the clinical trial space, how do we better identify patients that could benefit from our therapies? How do we better stratify our patients and all of that good stuff? And then post-launch, how are therapies being leveraged? What is the impact that they're driving? And how can we just continue to deliver increasing amounts of value every day to our end customers, the patients and providers? And so when you look at technology, the advances in digital health, and hopefully one day will just become health, right? I think it adds tremendous value to each one of these buckets. And happy to go into that more, in the Q&A or later on. But working with colleagues like on this call has been really exciting, and I'm excited for the future. So thanks.
Great. Jason, do you have any additional thoughts on what you would categorize as digital health?
Yeah, I mean, I echo a lot of what everyone has said, and really the way Roger and I tend to treat this or discuss this a lot is a convergence of two different disparate industries, that being tech and healthcare. And to everyone else into that common theme, because tech is converging with all industries, this is not going to transform healthcare. It's going to redefine healthcare. Healthcare will be different from this point going forward, because always the goal is to increase efficiency and precision and personalized healthcare. Well, technological and digital-based platforms are going to be the way to do it from this point forward.
Great. Thank you all. I think that's a good grounding of what we're going to dive into. It clearly is far-reaching and really does reach into every aspect of the current healthcare system and even how we do science in drug discovery. As a business development professional working in early stage life sciences, I'm always looking to collate intellectual property in a manner that can leverage partnerships for further development of the technologies. And the bread and butter for the therapeutics and device world, and diagnostic world tends to be patents. Those are the tools of the trade to encourage partnership. Digital health, I scratch my head a little bit and don't quite understand how we can best utilize the different buckets and tools of intellectual property to form a cohesive package around the technology to encourage partnership. Jason, can you kind of talk us through, and Roger, what are some intellectual property tools we have at our disposal to best protect and position digital health innovations for partnership and commercial development?
Sure, Lisa. Digital health is unique in that it offers the opportunity for multiple pathways of intellectual property protection. And some of these you've heard before in patents, trade secrets, trademarks, and data. And actually, and Roger will be talking extensively about this, but data is the new IP asset class, and in some cases the most important IP asset class. Patents and trade secrets have a symbiotic relationship. Depending on who you ask, they may think it's an and/or sort of situation, or an or situation when it really is an and situation when it applies to digital health. And then again, as data is sort of that new kid on the block where, it's it's a lesser known asset class. It's not one that a lot of early stage entrepreneurs or companies really think about, but it quickly becomes a very important aspect of your IP protection, particularly when you start doing transactions with other entities in which you're trying to acquire data or generate samples to acquire data. In terms of the patent and trade secret symbiotic relationship, we like to use a car analogy often and thinking about the hood of a car. And the way we think about digital health and its innovation is from a combination of perspectives in terms of what sits above the hood, which can be seen by the public, what's viewable by the public, or what sits under the hood. There's a combination of characteristics that help define that line. When it comes to digital health, one of those is eligibility. In certain countries, particularly in the US, there are limitations on what you're eligible to patent in the software area. So that gets taken into account when considering innovation in terms of what you're able to protect and not. And the second factor is quite simply what is disclosed in the public domain may help define what you should be patenting versus what you could be protecting as trade secret. And with convergence, like I talked about earlier, there's often two different mindsets that come together. And when it comes to healthcare and tech, intellectual property, there's two different mindsets, particularly when it comes to protecting software. On the tech side, historically, it's a very open source culture. It's a very dynamic culture. It's a transient culture when it comes to the tools that are used. And it's also a result-oriented culture, meaning your customers don't necessarily care about how things work, that they just work and produce the result that they want. And because of that, let's say patents, for example, may take less of a priority because there's a less disclosure out there about how the tools work. Therefore, there's less to protect, and accordingly, it's harder to reverse engineer someone else to see if they're infringing your patents if there's a lot less disclosure out on the market. On the healthcare side, it's completely different. Our customers care about how things work, why they work, and what that results in is a lot of publications, a lot of disclosure, whether it be on websites, with a lot of speaking engagements, whatnot, because to prove a concept works in healthcare, you have to explain to your customers how it works and why it works in a lot more detail than you do on tech. Consequently, that hood line can get dropped a little lower and lower when it comes to digital health because it's not a typical software tech tool. It's a tool that's going to be providing healthcare. Consequently, the customers need to understand what's going on and how it works. Therefore, patents take a little bit more of an importance as it applies here. There's other aspects too in intellectual property that intellectual property can help protect. Often, a lot of our software inventions are provided on some sort of interface or a graphic user interface where you interact with the customers, patients, clinicians, nurses, and whatnot. And in that case, often your interface is a mechanism to communicate you as a company. It's a branding opportunity. Consequently, when you design the interface, you design a unique icon, you're designing that with the understanding that if someone sees that, they're going to associate that with your company. And in that case, those sorts of ornamental type of features are protected, could be protectable under design patents. So there are many, and obviously trademarks for your company and any sort of marks or symbols or words or whatnot that are representative of your company, and you want to be as a source identifier attributable back to you is also protectable. So as you can see, there are a lot of different asset classes that are applicable. It really though becomes really, we think a question of where do you draw that line between patent and trade secret? Because the other areas are very easy to define in terms of what you need to protect. That's really the real interesting part that is unique to each company.
Yeah, I mean, I'd add maybe one additional thing to what Jason said. I mean, going back to that straddling that line between trade secret and what are you trade secret, what are you patent, right? I mean, it is absolutely true that that I think what has happened in our industry in the last maybe 5-10 years, frankly, is the easiest answer was just keep it as trade secret so no one will ever see it. That's actually not true. Because there's so many publications that go out there, right? And also because there's this trust level issue, and where trust level, which has caused a lot of companies to really delve into the details of how their algorithms work, right? It's not always possible to keep all that as trade secret. So definitely important to keep that in mind. And also there's this misnomer that that software is not patentable, or diagnostics applications or diagnostics inventions are not patentable. Also not true. There are definite ways to do it, drafting patents around it, and they are valuable. They are very much valuable and very much enforceable.
Great, I guess.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'd add to that real quick to what Roger knows. A good point about the perception of case law. In the United States, if you would have asked us 7 years ago or 7 years ago about what the status is of software patenting, the answer would be different, because the Supreme Court had come down with some cases that a lot of folks in our industry panicked about. But as any pendulum goes, the pendulum may have swung one way, and we knew it would swing back to the center. And what's happened is what's resulted is actually probably we're in a better place than we were years ago, in that though the definitions for patenting software, particularly in the US, has been curtailed a bit, it's been better defined, meaning both sides of the table, both us as patent attorneys and the examiners that are looking at these, are operating under a very clear set of guidelines. And so in reality, I think the world's in a better place now. I think it's more realistic, but it's also much better defined and more easy to find your place in terms of protecting your software inventions.
And what about in other jurisdictions like the UK or Europe?
There's definitely differences. In particular, when it comes to software, in particular between the US and Europe, where we pay a lot of attention to when preparing applications, thinking about sort of the worldwide view. There definitely is. In diagnostics the same way, biomarkers are the same way. Countries are different when it comes to how their case law interprets it. We have taken a very, very aggressive approach to software here in the United States. And also we've actually taken a very, very aggressive approach to a lot of the different areas within our space, as opposed to other countries, which I think are playing a little bit of catch up. So really, I think we're sitting in the best jurisdiction to be able to acutely address these inventions, thinking about sort of, the law in our backyard as a guiding post, but for sure, other countries are different depending what the technology is.
And I think this just comes back to somewhat of what is patent eligible subject matter. And I would just like to share with attendees that next Friday, CTL is holding an educational webinar on patent eligible subject matter, covering diagnostics and software. So we can get deeper into strategies of overcoming some of the prior court issues that have made patenting maybe a little bit more difficult in that session. Great. Did any of the other panelists want to comment on intellectual property? Like maybe, Anshu, is this something that, if J&J is looking to bring in a program, it's something that you look first on patents or data, or is it just another piece of the due diligence puzzle when you make partnership decisions?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's part of the due diligence, right? Like, where does the IP sit? Who owns the IP? Because for us, we also want to make sure that the IP can be used in the long term, right? And beyond just a single project or a single engagement. So, it's that does come into play, and it becomes important as well. And there's all sorts of partnerships that we can develop to make sure that both parties are successful. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Lisa, one other thing for people to think about is if they are trying to sell the asset right out of the university, then what is protectable and how they protect the asset for sale is critical. If they are looking to build a company around this, IP is a critical portion of that, and it affects fundraising, it affects partnerships and all those other things. But there are other forms of competitive advantage too that should be thought about when you're figuring out your strategy and your protections and et cetera. And knowing that can help inform what advice you want and need and what you invest in protecting, because a lot of IP expense adds up in the early days of small companies. And so you want to be very strategic about that. So you should think about that as well if you're looking to take it into a small business and build something around it.
Great. And I'd just like to point out, this is, offices like CTL and every academic institution has them. This is part of our service and our responsibilities to help innovators and faculty and trainees who are interested in commercializing their science to think through these issues and work with professionals like Jason and Roger, because it is true that the trade seeker comment, while it's great from a pure business perspective, is something that we navigate very carefully as academic institutions, as our primary mission is the dissemination of knowledge. But we have strategies that can kind of balance keeping key portions maybe confidential, but still enabling, broad publication, because that is, again, kind of a driving force in academia. I just want to kind of point that out. Great. So I think we've kind of settled on what is digital health, and that, it can be protected, and that there's multiple forms of protection beyond just patents, and it's not necessarily all patent driven. Which really kind of moves us into, okay, we have it, we have a way to protect it. Now, how do we commercialize it, really? So what, I'd like to kind of kick that off. Maybe Peter, you can start with kind of the academic perspective of what are some things early on that an investigator, an inventor working in this space needs to consider to kind of lay the groundwork to build a digital health innovation that might be attractive for adoption within the hospital setting or partner with other commercial entities.
Sure, thank you. I think a critical component of this, especially as working with universities, is the research aspect of this. Technology has a lot of power and a lot of potential, but it's not always value neutral. And especially in healthcare, I don't think we're in a spot where we can continually adding innovations and not have a way of defining whether or not they actually provide value. And in some cases, they could actually worsen value. They could increase disparities as opposed to decreasing them. And so I think a critical component of any new innovation or commercialization is really making sure there's actually some operations research done to show that it's improving the quality of care, if it's reducing costs, or if it's doing both. And I think that's a critical component, because over time, we will see a plethora of algorithms, a plethora of digital health startups, and we really need to be able to make sure that we're doing everything we can to assess that value and assess if it's achieving its said goal. Sometimes it will, and sometimes it won't. And I think that will ultimately lead to stronger products, better commercialization, and companies that will last longer and transform the future.
Great. Roger, I guess, can you talk a little bit also maybe on things to consider for data, particularly on kind of privacy issues and informed consents, and if you're kind of building a product around these types of data sets, what are some things just to be cognizant of?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, all the players in digital health are really going to go to look towards acquiring access and rights to large quantities of what we term as good quality data, right? I mean, it's not just the amount, it's also the quality, right? So, and a lot of metrics go into what, or at least ways of defining what's considered good quality data. And one of the aspects of this is make sure that you have the data is in compliance with privacy and informed consent laws, right? So you can actually do with the data what you need to, right? So I think one of the first things when I think about commercialization is that make sure you put together a good comprehensive data privacy and data rights compliance plan, right? Before you ingest data and start training your algorithms with it. It's critical, because once you train your algorithms, it's extremely hard. And let's say the nightmare scenario is that you trained your algorithm, you went for FDA approval, you went through 6 months to a year, right, of getting your software approved. And later on, just to find out, hey, wait a second, I ingested data from party A, and really, I actually can't use it in this way. And then you have to go back, pull that back out, reversion it, and go for another year, 6 months to a year of FDA approval. So very critical to get that straightened out. And also, when you're negotiating with partners, particularly with partners who are providing you the data, again, this goes back to what I was saying, make sure your agreements give you the adequate access to the data rights that you need. And importantly, especially if you're a commercial concern, gives you access to or ownership rights to the intellectual property, right? I can tell you when I sit on the negotiating table, and I've sat it from both sides, both from the data owners as well as the data users. I feel very empowered when I'm sitting on the side of the data owners. I really do, and I really take a very strong hand at how the type of intellectual property rights that I acquire in that type of situation, out of anything that's that they use my data for. So those very important points to get straightened out very early, because if you don't get it straightened out, it's really problematic and it'll trip up your business very early on.
Yeah, and I'll add to that it is absolutely true that the data owners own the leverage. And the interesting thing is that in this industry, often the data owners or the sample providers are the large entities. And the ones who want it are the entrepreneurs or the small entities that need to get access to that data. So not, as Roger said, the leverage already sits with the data owners. And then on top of that, the data owners are usually the big boys in the room. And they're going to have that negotiating leverage. And so they're the gatekeepers as well as the large entities. So a lot of leverage sits with the data owners often in these situations.
Great. I've been taking questions from the audience, and I appreciate everybody who sent in questions earlier. We've tried to structure today's conversation, make sure we address those at least in kind of large buckets, and I'll do my best to make sure we cover them as we go. But if not, we're trying to have answers and we can post them to the CTL website afterwards. But I do see an interesting question that popped up. So, I think we heard in the early part of the discussion that essentially digital health will just become health. It will just be the new way we conduct drug discovery and development. It will be the new way in which we provide care and consume care. It will be the new way in which we just experience healthcare. So the question is, does that mean, how do the skills have to change in the researchers and the innovators in the healthcare field in general to accommodate this, new revolution in digital health? Are there particular things that innovators and researchers need to start just integrating into their daily workflow or process of how they think about science now?
That's a great question.
It is a great question.
That's a great question. I mean, data science, if it wasn't already fully entrenched in the healthcare industry, it is now, right? So that is really the critical piece of it, is data science. Really understanding. Again, I can't stress this enough. When I grew up as a patent attorney, and I've been a patent attorney for almost 15 years. I was very patent focused for a good part of the beginning of my career. It's like, all right, so the way to protect your stuff is to go ahead and put a patent around it, or get copyrights or whatnot. It really has in recent years been very clear. This is played out commercially. Data rights and understanding how to go and use those data rights is the critical piece in this space. I mean, because that's what drives all the algorithms that Anshu was talking about that are used for intelligent drug design, for clinical cohort selection, for and also for later on for companion diagnostics type of products and solutions. That's the way it's being driven. So really, I think really getting a good solid background in data science and data analytics, and obviously machine learning, AI is those are critical skill sets to really to pick up.
Yeah, at least I agree with Roger. And a lot of the core components will be the same. You'll have a lot of the same challenges, contracting challenges, working with the physicians, making sure that you have the right technology. But like with data analytics, and if you bring all those four pieces together, it fundamentally is like care model transformation. And people need to be aware of that. Replicating what we do in person is not going to be beneficial, and transitioning that to virtual. You could take a bad business and make it digital. It's still a bad digital business. And so it's fundamental that people are trained in these skills to really rethink the whole care model and the way that we provide care in the future, using, telehealth, using data analytics, using remote patient monitoring, for the future. And we need to continue to adopt and change our regulatory framework, because it's not built for digital health. And so we don't want to be creating all the skills and the training for our current environment, because I think over time it will definitely change.
Great. And so going back a little bit, we were talking about, it seems, I'm going to call data as the foundational driver of really innovation in this space. And I think, Roger, you brought up kind of this, haves and haves nots in regard to data. I mean, is there any solutions to aid collaboration, or, how to get past that kind of impasse, and if, kind of correlated with this, there was a question from the audience of why do data owners have so much leverage? And can't somebody just shop or like, is there always going to be somebody who will just give a better price and they can just go and pick another large entity with data? And what are
Those
the
are
kind
all
of
great.
pitfalls of that?
Those are great questions. I mean, it is as things have evolved in recent years and what we've seen. Yeah, data owners do have a lot of leverage, providing they understand what that leverage is. That's the critical piece, and I can't stress that enough. I see that. I deal with a lot of situations where the data owner doesn't really realize that they're actually in a position of strength, extreme strength. But having said that, you don't leverage it in a way that's counter to what you're trying to do either, right? So the critical piece is really understanding, the respective parties, what rights you need or have, and as well as and especially from the perspective of intellectual property, what's the scope, the IP you need that results out of the use of that data. There's been a lot of talk in the industry right now of doing data pooling, right? And how that will be done. In my views, as these things evolve, or these types of approaches evolve, you're going to see a lot of parallels to what people do in patent pooling, right? And really a lot of they're going to start carving out spaces for each other, right? We can use this. Let's say company A, we're going to pull, all of us going to pull the data together. Company A has got you can use this data in the field of oncology. Company B can use it in the field of something else, right? So those are one solution of dealing with that. And another thing that's very difficult in the way our data is generated here, at least in the United States, is that they come in a lot of different formats. So what's happening right now is that, you have a lot of good sized pockets of data sitting in different healthcare systems and different companies, because they're formatted in a different way. Again, conglomerating this data into one larger data set to use in data analytics is a challenge. And that's really unique in some ways to our healthcare system. So if you go abroad and where it have nationalized healthcare systems, like, for example, the UK, a very good example. A lot of the medical records are more homogenized. It's because it goes by under a governmental standard. Because that's the case, I think, if you look in the long term, there's going to be a lot of geopolitical plays with data for use in digital health. Countries such as, and folks point to China because China has a lot, they can sequence and they have the larger population, et cetera. Well, China's got a weakness in their data. It's homogenized, right? It's one ethnicity. UK, on the other hand, is not that way. It's a multi-ethnic country. And so they have a heterogeneous data set. So really, if you look at all the countries out there generating good quality data for future digital health applications, UK is in a very strong position. You're seeing a lot of this play out. So it'll be interesting to see here in the United States whether or not we eventually try to adopt more standardized approaches to generating data and to allow the sharing piece to happen.
And I think I would be remiss if I just didn't point out, as academic medical centers, we have a sacred stewardship obligation to our patients and their data, and to be sure that we are using them in a way that is meant to benefit patients and society. I don't know, Peter, maybe you can talk about data use within the context of kind of an academic medical center and some of the considerations or limitations we have to use sort of, I'll call it that, the engine of digital health innovation.
Correct. It's fundamental. And the relationship between providers and patients and the trust they have around that data is fundamental and critical. And especially in this environment when cybersecurity is such a threat to us. So we really need to not only think about how do we be able to push the care model, advance care, be innovative, and provide higher quality care in the home, and do it hopefully at a lower cost, but we need to do it in a way that their information is secure. Time and time again, this is our biggest threat at any moment, and it just doesn't apply to clinical data, it's financial data. I mean, it's everywhere. So we need to find and strike that balance between the trust of the patient, good cybersecurity principles and actions, and also, furthering the care model to really advance digital health.
Great. I think I want to kind of continue along talking about commercialization. So I think we've kind of talked about the early stages, the things you need to think about, the data sources that you're using to power your innovation to really make it commercially attractive. But a little bit later, kind of on in that kind of commercialization phase, maybe Kathryn, you can talk us through some of the things you need to think about in regard to, scaling across a fragmented healthcare industry, how to get adoption, sort of the different pillars of the healthcare system, including insurance companies, pharma providers, like what are the barriers that need to be overcome to get implementation of what might be good. And I'll throw in a bonus one. Are we, from a commercialization perspective, and should also be interested in your thoughts on this, is it the solution that's really important, or is it really the problem that the proposed solution is addressing? Like what is really that driver for commercial adoption? And Kathryn, why don't you kick it off? I know I rolled a lot in there. So.
That's okay. It's both, right? So your solution, Peter's phrase about creating value is the most critical thing here. And there are lots of ways to value. Trust, just to build a bridge to the data discussion we were just having, trust is part of your currency and your value creation. It is going to be of increasing importance going forward. And we do need to find ways to move the data around better, to share data, things like that, because as we think about innovation and learning and advancing the science part of care, which has not died just because we finally focused on the fact that it's not just about science, it's about how you deliver that care to a human, and how you integrate that care into a human's life. But the science, the data is where the knowledge is. New knowledge lies in finding your way through that data and pulling new learnings out of it. But when you think about taking a learning and delivering it to a customer or a consumer or a patient in order to create value, you have to start with the problem you're solving, because most people don't really invent a new tool, a new drug, a new anything, without having some problem they're trying to solve. So you need to start with the problem. But what you need to recognize, to your question about barriers and adoption across the system, is that in healthcare, more so than any other industry out there, we have multiple stakeholders and multiple customers, okay? The same person does not try, pay, choose, deliver, use, right? It's not new Coke. And so when you start thinking about your problem and how your solution changes care, you need to look at a range of people around it and understand how they experience the problem, how they'll experience the change that your solution brings, and whether or not you're creating value for each of the people who you need to either buy in, use, pay, sign a contract, etc. It affects market size and opportunity, who your customers and stakeholders are, what your IP strategy is, because you want to protect the things that are going to drive your competitive advantage once you're commercialized. And that's going to affect how much anybody pays for any of your IP or for the business itself. And so you need to get outside your bubble. Everybody starts with an expertise, and they oftentimes start with a set of advisors who are specialized in an angle of the problem. You notice all these single N's here. And this is a medical science community that we're talking to. You all know the danger of N of 1 or N of 3. But you need diversity in your N's, just like the point about multiracial population in the UK versus China. And so one of the examples I like to talk about to give people a feel for how you need to think about the totality early on is there's a company out there that invented a diabetic retinopathy screening device that could be run by a tech in a primary care office. This solves what I call a macro public health program. We screen too late to take meaningful action that is available to us. We can actually help people with diabetic retinopathy if we catch them early enough. We don't do it often enough in the early stages. And they built this whole system based on ophthalmologists and IDNs buying it. But there was nothing planned early on for how you get the primary care offices to adopt it so that they can use it at scale with a large number of patients and deliver on that benefit. And they've fixed that problem and gone on to do okay. But that's the sort of macro micro disconnect that you want to try and think through early on.
Yeah, I can, oh, sorry, Kathryn.
No, go right ahead. That was a distinct pause to give someone else a chance.
Okay, no problem. No, I mean, all the points you're mentioning are fantastic. So I'll give kind of my brief perspective from both being in the kind of founder seat and then now in the current role that I have. And, you know, I think, I know it's a bit Captain Obvious, right? But just to re-emphasize, don't boil the ocean. Don't try to serve every customer in the healthcare ecosystem from day one. And really spend a ton of time articulating what is the problem or need that you're trying to solve. Because if you can't articulate it, we can't parse it. We don't know what's going, like, I mean, it's just not going to be a fruitful, you know, intro or pitch, right? And so also, you know, be comfortable with the fact that the need that you're solving is not going to be a need that resonates with every single pharma company, hospital system, whatever, you know, insurance company that you're going to be talking to, and be comfortable with that. That's okay. So, I mean, that would be my first kind of piece of advice is just to have that really clear North Star and, you know, pursue that doggedly and really test it and really pressure test it with as many people as possible before you even go and form a partnership to start gathering data, right? Or start entering into those types of negotiations. Once you have that framed up, and actually let me back up. If you're interested in working with pharma and if you're excited about what we do, which I hope you are, and this is to all my entrepreneurs and VC friends and everybody else who's on this webinar, you know, reach out to us. We are more than happy to talk about what ideas you have, help provide you with that sort of strategic brainstorming session to determine, you know, are you kind of on that path to something that could be useful to us, or, you know, is there some way that we can creatively work together to help shape that? So, you know, don't feel like you have to come with a fully formed solution and that's the only time that we're going to be listening to you or be interested. If you're early and you're excited about something and you've got a unique perspective on things, and you just want to sort of have a sounding board, more than happy to do so. I think when it comes to commercialization, right, there is all sorts of variables that we can go into, whether it's from fundraising to regulatory to, you know, building a team and you know, the capabilities and strengths that you need to have. But, you know, I think the other thing to understand is that going back to that original need and then original pain point area, once you have that really clearly defined, you'll find a lot of entities that are willing to sort of hang their hat on that need and say, yes, you know, that is something that I have an issue with, and that'll help speed up everything, whether that's contracting, whether that's, you know, recruiting new people, whether that's going out and raising venture capital or whatever else that may be. So that's my 2 cents that, you know, to have a successful commercialization, start at the very basic foundation of what it is that you're actually trying to do, because there's a lot of great technologies out there, right? Everybody throws around artificial intelligence and machine learning, right? But what does it actually mean to the problem that you're actually solving? Everybody throws around big data. I mean, my small bit about big data is that all data is not good data, right? It's how you use it and the data itself, right? The depth and the breadth. So you could have a massive data set, but if it's only, for example, single points in time and the customer is looking for a longitudinal data set, well, you could spend a year negotiating that partnership and then find out that data is actually not worth what your value to the customer that you're going. You may have to go and find a new customer. If there's holes in the data, if it's difficult to extract that data, if it's difficult to curate that data, if it's difficult to own that data over an extended period of time, or at least have rights to that data over an extended period of time, these are all kind of really important considerations. And it all stems again from what is the need that you're trying to solve, and let everything else sort of drip from there. Happy to go into more detail, but that's just my high level opinion on things.
Hey, Peter, I'd like to hear, as the Chief Technology Officer for New York Presbyterian, when a new company comes to you and says, I have a solution X, what is your process to go through to see if that's something that you want to implement, within your hospital system?
It's a great question. I think it goes back to what's been highlighted before. It's what is the actual problem that we're trying to solve? And, it comes down to, at the end of the day, it's 80% people, 15% process, and 5% the actual technology. I think that we need to really evaluate that problem and really make sure, do we have the right process? Do we have the right people in aligning it, and then applying the technology to it? And one other thing that Kathryn raised that I just want to touch on for a moment is this issue around kind of what I call like the last mile of healthcare delivery is a major issue. It's a major issue that affected us throughout the past year. It's a major issue that affects all technological innovation, I think, in healthcare. And it's one that's going to continue and grow until it's addressed in a fundamentally different way. When you look at even, I know it's not digital health, but if you even look at therapeutics and pharmaceuticals and other treatments, there's a massive gap in last mile delivery to the actual consumer and to the actual patient. And that is not a small feat. And it's one that's going to have to be addressed to fundamentally change the way that we care for patients. I could give a plethora of examples of how that's the case. And so we can have all the technological innovation in the world, but if we don't have a model to be able to get it delivered to the patient, it's going to go nowhere. And that's almost even more important than some of the innovation that's going to get commercialized.
Great. And Anshu, just kind of back to you. What are some ways you can form partnerships with people who are working early in this space, whether just in general or J&J's approach to kind of partnership in this field?
Yeah, sure. I can give kind of the high level, and folks on the call should feel free to email me, if they'd like to talk further. I don't know, assuming the contact information might be circular, at me on LinkedIn or whatever. There are multiple ways to work with us. So we have a significant focus and a significant investment on innovation, right? So early stage companies, for example, specifically our J-Labs program, right? So we can provide great office space, strategic guidance, mentorship, connection to a VC network, et cetera, for early stage founders who have an idea that they want to explore further, and just need sort of the additional infrastructure to enable them to do so. I think, if there's a specific therapeutic area that you're interested in or that you're working on, feel free to message me or folks like me and have an initial call. Let's brainstorm around what you're thinking about. And then, happy to help bring in the key stakeholders from that specific therapeutic area to sort of further battle test the idea and see if there's value. I would say kind of the biggest thing is don't be hesitant to just reach out and just email us and let us know. We do things like quick fire challenges to get proposals of different programs and companies that are doing interesting things around specific themes. But again, if there's something interesting that you're working on that you'd like to engage us with, there are multiple points of contact, and I can guarantee you that we're interested. So
great. And there's I think one more question that I don't know where this fits because I know nothing about it. So I'd be interested in the panelists' brief thoughts as we start to wrap up. Is how and when will blockchain have a significant impact on digital health? Any takers on that one?
I'll kick it off. I'd say how it's obviously going to help with data security. When in the US, it could be a while. In my mind, I think the integration of a blockchain into a healthcare system, the last system that's going to be easy to do is here because it's so decentralized. That's why blockchain is being adopted in areas like in the Middle East or in Eastern Europe, in areas where you're able to, where you have a centralized healthcare system and you can integrate blockchain into it much more easily. I think it's going to be very difficult in the US. It's going to take time.
Great. I think with that, maybe, I'll just remind everybody that we have 2 more installments in the Digital Health Series, diving deeper into some of these issues. Our second panel will be in April, looking at regulatory and reimbursement issues and matters for digital health. And our third panel in May will really focus on investment funders, founding, and a deeper dive into commercialization. I'll open it up for panelists if there's any last words or comments or thoughts that you want to leave everybody with. Well,
Okay, I'll kick this one off real quick. There's been some questions about algorithm patenting and software patenting and IP strategy. I think just generally addressing this. Patents or IP filings and the cost, everybody said it's expensive. What's important is to get an IP strategy in place, get an 18-month to 2-year IP strategy in place. You'd be very surprised as an entrepreneur how you don't have to address IP now if you get a plan in place and you realize, okay, I'm 6 months away from having to really worry about this in my development timeline. So that's one thing I'd say. When it comes to patenting algorithms and software, a lot of this is again around the hood line. Roger and I have spent an hour on a webinar just talking about the hood line. So we're trying to address that question now. Be difficult. So if anybody wants to reach out to Roger and I to address that separately, please do. I just want to make sure I got those across. Thank you.
I just follow up a little bit on this. It's we're living exciting times. I really do honestly believe that. And if nothing else, the last 12 months with the pandemic has really proven out that a lot of these these digital health technologies that were kind of, one of those things that kind of sat on the sidelines 12 months ago, you're seeing it being deployed in every way, shape, or form imaginable, right? Whether it's from, again, this move from provider-centric to a more patient-centric type of approaches to delivering medicine, to things as that are being talked about right now. There's these vaccination passports that should be sitting on your phones, things of that nature. You're seeing it. You're seeing it play out. You're seeing it accelerated in a manner that I think few really would have imagined 12 months ago prior to this pandemic. So I do really believe at the end of the day, as these technologies flow through, right, what you're going to see is that it's going to transform the way that the healthcare is delivered. We're seeing it already, right? It's going to reduce healthcare costs. It has an immense potential to reduce healthcare costs, and also really, hopefully, and most importantly, result in better outcomes for patients, right? Because now there's a lot of different tools to ensure, again, this personalized, precise approach to delivering medicine, or even developing medicine, which Anshu went into some detail earlier.
great. I think with that, go ahead, Kathryn.
I was just going to say, we talked about this as we talked about the commercialization, but ultimately, people decide, not technology. So when you're thinking about how much value you create, what you're thinking about is value creation equals value added minus the cost of change. And so as you go through, you don't want to boil the ocean, but as you are defining and refining what you're going to do with your solution and how you're going to create the maximum value, understand the change costs of all the people who are going to have to touch it.
Okay, great. Well, with that, I would like to thank all of the panelists for joining us. I know I've learned a lot. As I said, digital health is not my my bailiwick, so to speak. This has been exciting and engaging. I hope everybody tunes in for our second panel in April covering regulatory and reimbursement, and our third panel in May on really funding and financing. As I said, CTL is hosting a Patent 101 eligibility subject matter webinar next Friday. I think it's a good, if anybody's interested in more details on how to patent software, how to patent machine learning and AI innovations, I think that will be covered well there. So with that, I thank everybody for joining us.